Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And we're almost done the 90s with Steven Spielberg as we wrap up with Saving Private Ryan. And we just might have the biggest fan of Saving Private Ryan here on the show this week. We have Heath. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Shane. I appreciate it. I don't know if I'm the biggest fan, but I am a big one, and I will try my best to do this movie justice by talking for 17 hours.
I'm going to time it. But before we hop into our three segments on the show, would you like to shamelessly plug anything for our lovely guests?
Sure. You can find me most readily on Letterboxd at the One Heath Bar. I watch about 15 movies a week on average. I write a review for every single one of them. Current blockbusters, new releases, classics, award-winning Oscar films. I cover the gambit. I do 200 words to 4,500 words. Pick your poison, short form, long form reviews. If that sounds interesting, if you want to see me ramble about films, you can find me there.
Definitely recommend Heath's thoughts on Saving Private Ryan. And we're going to get the audio form now and video. But for those who haven't checked out this show before, we have three segments. We have our coming attractions for the week that this releases, which is September 9th. Big week. School starts for me. It's going to be a fun one. Feature film, and then we have some recommendations for you. And just a quick plug, if you want to take part in helping choose the next director on this show, go over to my Instagram and check out my daily matchups that we're going through. I've received 60 nominations in terms of directors, with Quentin Tarantino being our number one seed, and followed by Christopher Nolan, Robert Zemeckis, which kind of surprised me a bit, and Denis Villeneuve. They've already all steamrolled through into the next round, so good for them. We'll see who wins. But this time I kind of gave the choice of who was going to be in this tournament, because last time I picked all 128 directors and then kind of just let it go. I have a sinking feeling that Nolan's going to win this one, especially because last time he destroyed Quentin Tarantino, which kind of shocked me.
I almost feel like you should manipulate it, because if Quentin really wants to do the I'm going to retire at 10 films thing, like, that's around the corner. We'll see if he actually does it. And if so, you could just do a retrospective on his whole career.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Nolan's not going to stop until he dies.
Yeah. There's one interesting thing that's happened so far is my friend Joe tried to spark a little support campaign for Danny DeVito, who he nominated against Robert Zemeckis, and he actually was keeping it close. It was tied halfway through the day, and then Zemeckis pulled away. Yeah. But my brother did almost get John Carpenter to win last time. Which honestly, I wouldn't be mad about that one.
That'll be fun. I just rewatched Escape from New York today. So
the name Snake Plissken.
I thought you were dead.
I love that.
I lost track of how many times they said that line. That's just the best.
Mythos.
I heard you were dead.
Kurt Russell. Love Kurt Russell. But to get to our actual show here, our coming attractions this particular week, like honestly, the last few weeks has been very interesting, because what the hell's coming out? Except Disney seems to be shaking things up, and we have Pinocchio coming out. So, Heath, what are your thoughts about the new Pinocchio film coming out?
My thoughts about Pinocchio is the same as every other of these Disney live action remakes, which is it's not necessary at all in the slightest. If I wanted to watch it, I'd go back and watch the original animated hand-drawn cartoon. And especially for Pinocchio, because Pinocchio is, I think, genuinely one of the best that Disney Animation Studios has ever made. I think it is arguably the highlight of the golden age. It is one of the most artistic pieces Disney has ever put together in terms of its craftsmanship, especially in terms of its themes. I mean, it is so dark, and gets into some real world situations and really creepy, dark ways that is almost beautiful in the way that it makes you think about life and what it means to do certain things with your life. And it goes in a direction that no other Disney film has ever tried to touch. And I don't know, something about making that live action, you know, you can get away with things in cartoons that you can't in live action. And, you know, I don't know how well it's going to come across kidnapping a whole bunch of little kids and taking them to Pleasure Island. But at the same time, I'm almost betting that Disney's going to neuter that. I have a feeling there's no way they're going to do what they did for the original film in the 30s, having these kids smoke cigars and drink beers and make literal jackasses out of themselves. Like I'm sure they'll still turn into donkeys, but like I don't. Long story short, if you want to see the story of Pinocchio, go watch the original, because it's a masterpiece of animation, and I don't think this is necessary. But with all that rambling as the forefront here, I'll still see it because I'm a sap and sucker, and I watch almost everything that comes out. And I believe Robert Zemeckis, which he's a legend at this point. He's been doing this for decades. He's one of the greats, and not everything he does is awesome, but a lot of his stuff is, and it's Tom Hanks. And, you know, I wouldn't even be surprised if Disney's like sneakily trying to make this for awards purposes, just given the time of year it's coming out. It almost feels like a kickoff to awards season with that, and a couple other movies that are attempting to come out here soon. But, you know, I could see them sneakily trying to do like visual effects, art direction, maybe costumes, something like that. We'll see when the movie comes out. But so yeah, overall, I'm not excited for it. I would highly recommend the original, but if you are interested, and if you're just like me, which is you're just going to see it anyway, then yeah, good. Especially if you already have Disney Plus. If you already have Disney Plus, just watch it. It'll be there. So.
Will it even qualify for any Oscars? Because it's not getting released in theaters.
If they think that they're going to make a push for something, I promise you that they will find a theater somewhere in California that they can release it for a week to make it qualify for Oscars.
We'll see.
Just like Netflix does. You know, I have zero doubt that they could make that happen.
I just feel like, for me, I feel like the theaters are probably mad at Disney, because like this would have hands down been the biggest movie to release in September. Like hands down. Like I don't even think there'd be competition. No. But, you know,
except with themselves, if they also chose to release Hocus Pocus 2, which they also are not releasing in theaters, and they are releasing straight to Disney Plus.
They're really trying to push Disney Plus, but like I think the theaters are like
Disney. The theaters are struggling right now.
Come on. Yeah. Because I think there's one movie tracking at $20 million this month, and it's Don't Worry, Darling. And it's barely that. So like not good at all.
August was already a really slow, dry month, and September looks even worse. Like there's movies that are coming out that I'm going to want to see, but when I just think of the average movie going audience and what people are interested in and what I've heard buzz and people talking about, like Don't Worry, Darling is about it. And even that is very minor on people's radar. Like this is not going to be a fun time for theaters.
Not even a bullet train to get something going.
No,
not at all. Top Gun will still keep making $5 million every weekend.
To comment on that a little further, it's so weird that we had this pandemic where we delayed so many movies, and it feels like we've already run out. I don't know how this happened. Like we didn't put movies in theaters for like a year and a half. Where did all these movies go? Like that were already in the can or that were filming during the pandemic. Like I know, don't get me wrong, I'm not naive. I know a lot of them went to streaming services, a lot of them straight video on demand. I know that, but a lot of the quote unquote big blockbusters were saved. And I feel like there were more, and that we shouldn't already be through them all. Like I know there were some of the
brothers.
I know that there were some of the big ones, like No Time to Die and stuff like that. And like we definitely hit those. And yeah, I know Warner Brothers, in an effort to push HBO Max, really doing the day and date release of, and putting it on their streaming service. But I don't know. It just feels like I could have swore I'd seen the trades that there were more movies in the can than this. And it feels like we're already just done.
Not
Like
good.
everything that was supposed to come out is out, and now we have nothing, and the studios are struggling.
They're just hoping that they could get a bunch of buzz from some big name people for awards season, you know, with the Damien Chazelles, the Steven Spielbergs, the David O. Russells, who's popping back in again. Even Scorsese pushed his film back to April. Which even award season is looking kind of bare right now, based off of some of the things that have gotten pushed back or some of the things that are on the schedule. Like, especially with now that they've officially announced that there will be at minimum, no matter what, 10 pictures nominated for Best Picture. And I'm sitting here wondering, I don't know if we have. I mean, again, we have to see them. Batman and Everything Everywhere All at Once.
And that's what I was just going to say. That's what I was just going to say is, like, obviously we still have to see these movies. Who knows what's going to happen? But it's starting to feel like to me, this is another year of Black Panther, where we might get a populist feature in a Best Picture nominee, because they're going to struggle to find something. Like, that could very realistically happen. I think Everything Everywhere All at Once should be there, period, because I think that is an amazing film. But I could see something like the Batman actually ending up in there, and just sure, because we don't got anything else.
And in the crazy weird multiverse that,
or maybe they nominate Top Gun Maverick. Who knows? Like,
and honestly, if Top Gun Maverick doesn't get nominated at this point, and throwing a Northman there too, let's get weird.
Yeah,
get real weird.
Embrace the weird, Academy. I think that's the lesson.
And give Brendan Fraser an Oscar for Best Actor. Just give it all
for The Whale.
The Whale.
Yeah.
Comes out in December. Apparently got a 6-minute standing ovation at the Venice Film Festival.
Yeah, didn't he win something at Toronto as well? I thought.
I'm not sure.
Was it Venice? I don't know. I'm down for Brendan Fraser making a huge comeback. I want every accolade thrown at this man. He is awesome.
He is a gem. But the widest released film coming out this weekend is Barbarian, which I don't know if this will, like, I hope this makes more money than The Invitation, which, like, showed up and made $7 million. Actually, 6.8, didn't even make that when the real numbers came in. But this, I don't even think they released a full trailer of this. Like, they just have this one teaser trailer of, like, this woman staying in the Airbnb with Bill Skarsgård. And all
very creepy Bill Skarsgård. Like, I don't want to, like, spoil anything for the people that are, like, no frames on trailers. But I'll just say that the trailer sets something up as a premise and makes it look like one person is not friendly, but then also at the same time makes that same person that's very not friendly looking look like the only friendly ally. So it's very confusing. I think that's intentional. I think they want you to be confused going into the film. But it also, if you've seen enough films and movies, you kind of, or at least I feel like I have an inkling of where it's going, and I almost feel like it's kind of spoiling itself. So it still looks like a fun, simple horror. Great way to start, into the fall and getting people ready for spooky season. People love it. So, cool. I don't know how excited I am for it. I'll probably, again, just like Pinocchio, I'll probably see it. I'm not like jazzed though, but I'm not like dreading it either. So it's a movie that exists.
Yeah. By the time this episode releases, I will have seen it 2 days before, because I'm going to a press screening this week. I also get to see one for Pearl. Excited about that too.
Now that one I'm excited for. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? Between the teaser and the interesting looking poster that came out for this movie, I'm like, got me intrigued.
For Barbarian or for Pearl?
For Barbarian. Oh, okay. Pearl already got me excited.
Yeah.
From the
I was excited for Pearl when X rolled its credits. I was in.
So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're here for. We're here for Saving Private Ryan. Woo-hoo. Now, Heath, why did I not give you a choice or even ask you if you wanted to do this one and just assume that this was going to be the one that you were going to do?
Shane, well, I can answer that question for you. That's because I think this is the best movie that has ever been made in the history of cinematic film. This is my favorite film of all time. am not ashamed to say that. I know some people waffle on, maybe this film, maybe that. Nope, not me. It's this film. It's been this film for almost 25 years. At this point, I don't know if it would ever get dethroned. It would take a miracle. I think it's perfect. Now, again, I'll say this right up front because I know that there are some people that don't like this film, and I'm sure we'll get into some of those topics as to why some people don't like this film. Art is subjective. Everyone is allowed to like and love whatever they like and love, and hate and despise whatever they want to hate and despise. But for me, I think this film is perfect, and there's no other movie I would rather talk about than this movie. So that is why, Shane, I was not even given an option. I was told I needed to be on this podcast, which is fine because as soon as it came out, the schedule anyway, I wanted to be on it. So that's okay.
So to put in perspective, there was 2 episodes for Spielberg that I didn't even ask the person originally. And the other one was my friend Matt for Jurassic Park. Because I know that's like his movie. Yeah. Even to the point where he got in trouble for biting a kid in elementary school because he thought he was a dinosaur.
Right.
Sorry, Matt, I told your story. But this is a film that, if it wasn't for Voldemort and the man who should not be named, this would have won Best Picture at the Academy Awards because screw you, Miramax. But this is a story of World War II and a very interesting mission given to a platoon who has to find Private Ryan, who is the lone surviving member of a family of 4 brothers after the first 3 died in combat. And this film deals with a lot of the moral gray area of like, why should this mission be happening? And why should these other men be sacrificing themselves for this one person? And, you know, we have Tom Hanks, we have Matt Damon, and a ridiculous, well, I feel like I say this every episode now, because Spielberg just happens to find all the most ridiculously famous, random, great actors, character actors, and everybody to shove into his movie.
Oh, this cast is nutty.
Yep. And this film, clocking in at about 2 hours and 50 minutes, is one of the most graphic and engrossing World War II films ever put to film. One little anecdote I'd like to share is that my grandfather fought in World War II, didn't really talk about it much. He did watch certain war movies, like he would watch The Dirty Dozen with me. He'd watch The Great Escape with me. He loved watching Patton because he fought under Patton and was like the one out of 100 people who actually liked him. But he would not see this movie.
Yep.
And it's because...
So I'm gonna jump in here.
Go right ahead.
So I have a lot to say in this movie. I'm gonna try very best not to ramble for 17 hours like I joked about earlier. But this movie's impact on me is substantial. I unequivocally state that this movie is responsible for me being a fan of film. This is what got me into movies. And it has impacted me to this day as to how I kind of define movies that I think are well crafted, well directed, well acted, entertaining, even if the story is not meant to be cheerful or whatever have you. And what, Shane, you were alluding to there, and what you were getting ready to say is, for those who don't know, Shane's grandfather was not the only person that could not watch this movie. In fact, a lot of people couldn't watch this movie, and a lot of people still to this day can't watch this movie, but in particular veterans. And that's because the opening 25 minutes of this film might be the most uncomfortably realistic, visceral depiction of war literally ever put to film. And I don't even think it's arguable. I don't think it's close. This is horrifying to watch. If you have not seen it, it is a depiction of the assault on Normandy, the Battle of Normandy, D-Day, June 6th, 1944. It is when the Allied troops, the Americans, the British and Canadians and I think there's some French. I don't recall correctly.
And Australians.
Assaulted the beaches on the northern shore of Normandy, France, in an attempt to retake the European theater on the Western Front from the German Nazi forces. And it is a nightmare. It is a visual nightmare from the moment it starts. And I won't go into it too much right now, but I'll get to what I was going to say, which is this was so scary and so real that many, many people walked out of the theater. They couldn't take it. They couldn't handle watching it, especially veterans. This triggered so many episodes of PTSD that the U.S. Department of War deemed it necessary to actually, not the U.S. Department of War, I take that back, I apologize. The Department of Veteran Affairs deemed it necessary to set up a nationwide hotline so that people could call in and find a psychiatrist to immediately report their symptoms and their PTSD-induced anxiety attacks due to the realistic nature of this film and its opening D-Day scene. That is how realistic, graphic, visceral, raw, whatever terminology you want to use to describe it, that's how uncomfortable but brilliant at the same time from a filmmaking perspective the opening 25 minutes of this movie is. In fact, I would, again, I'm biased, this is my favorite movie ever, I would say that 25 minutes of film is probably the best 25 minutes of film ever shot, just in terms of unyielding anxiety, tension, atmosphere, and drama. You don't know who these people are. You don't know their names. You don't know anything about them. All you know is the mission, and that is enough. And you are hooked from that moment on through the rest of the film for these men, and you are struggling to care about anything else other than, oh my God, I hope they live. I hope they make it. This is hell. It is the literal interpretation of hell as accurately as we could feel it on this planet. And it's just, it's intense. It is beyond intense. And that's why I would even say, again, like I said at the beginning, some people can't watch this, and that's totally fine. If you are one of those people, I totally get it. My wife can't watch the opening of this movie. She can watch any point of the movie after, but she cannot watch the D-Day scene. And there's a lot of people like that. So trigger warning to those out there who have not seen this film before. It is intense. You will see body parts that are decapitated. You will see bodies explode. You will see people burning and melting on fire. You will see bullets going through people's skulls, and like it's not CG, it is practical effects.
Yep.
So it looks incredibly real and very disturbing. Like it is hard to watch, but in that moment, from a filmmaking perspective, that is some of the greatest artistry you could ever see in film. The makeup that they put into these injuries, these battle wounds, the prosthetics they're using for these blown off limbs, the costumes and their wear and tear feel so realistic. The sound design is just incredible. When you hear these explosions of the Bangalores and the sand as they're blowing through barbed wire, or even the ping off of the M1 Garand rifles that they're using when they eject their cartridges, like that gets to you, and it will start to build up really quick. You'll hear bullets whizzing past you. If you're listening to this in surround sound or like some kind of IMAX presentation, you will think that stuff is blowing up around you. You will hear the snap of a bullet cracking against a wall right by your head. Like, it is scary. And that's how this movie opens. That is the tempo. That is the starting point. That's a starting point so high that would be most films' climactic conclusion, and they still wouldn't achieve what this film did. And they did it for their opening. So I went on a tangent there. I apologize, but just I literally think this is the greatest 25 minutes of film ever shot. I think it is mind-blowingly good. And yeah, I had to go on a rant. So Shane, take it.
And then they have a whole entire third act, which is incredible.
Second act and third act.
Which, a couple of things. One, the same kind of energy and documentarian style filmmaking that Jan Kaminski brought to Schindler's List, which made that uncomfortable and feeling lived in, brings to this one too, which is really uncomfortable because you feel like you're in that boat with them. You feel like you're falling in the water with them. You feel like you're on this beach with them. And like the moments where they zoom in on Tom Hanks and he's just like out of it and just slow motion everything.
Oh,
you know,
that goes even back to the sound design I was talking about. Like you'll hear an explosion and someone will get concussed and you'll just hear the sound cut out. We, the audience, feel that concussion too. It's crazy.
Which I know this has been spoofed so many times. Looking at you, Sausage Party. But the sequence with like the man picking up his arm and walking, or just
they put that in Conker's Bad Fur Day on the Nintendo 64 the year after this movie came out. It was insane.
The medic saving that guy, and then just the guy got shot in the head that second. It's just like, and
saved a man's life, didn't matter 2 seconds later.
No. And then the guy who got a ricochet off his helmet takes his helmet off. It's like, whoa, and then he gets shot. And it's just like, hell is going on here? And just the brutality, like from a technical standpoint, there's very few scenes that capture this. But a couple of little details that I want to bring up about the beginning of the film, because there's one scene, one sequence before this. You have an old man coming up to a cemetery, and that ends with such an intense zoom in of this man's eyes, and
that will come back 3 hours later.
3 hours later, and you're like, I spoil the hell out of these movies on this show, but like, you expect that kind of shot to be followed up with somebody else. You know, like Spielberg did it in Last Crusade with looking at young Indy. You got that hat on, hat comes up, and it's Harrison Ford. No, but
the movie also kind of does lead you to believe that that's supposed to be Tom Hanks the whole time.
They don't cut directly to him, but there is, I think at least might even be 20 minutes later, there's an exact shot of that zoom in on Tom Hanks's eyes, and you're like, okay, that was Tom Hanks. Nope, Steven Spielberg tricked you, and he tricked me. And that twist of like who that really is, that helps, which that sets up unexpected stakes. Because like it tricks you into thinking that like Tom Hanks is safe. In this movie, and
no one is safe.
Nobody's safe.
People say that in Game of Thrones, no one is safe. This movie is the definition of no one is safe. The people that come out at the end of this movie are not the people that you would expect to come out. For the record, for those who haven't seen it, I'm going to dance around who, but there are literally only 3 people out of our entire main squad of cast that survive. 3. You will see dozens of people die. Many people will die. In the main squad, it's about, I think, like 8 to 10. But only 3 people are going to live, and I promise you, they're not the people you thought were going to live.
Which, now, what puts this apart from, say, like a Dunkirk, which Dunkirk is an incredible technical feat. And, you know, Nolan just firing on all cylinders, doing his thing, is character.
Yes.
Because, like, to be fair, there's, like, nobody you get to know in Dunkirk.
I would actually make an argument that that's intentional. I think Nolan.
Well, I know it's intentional. It's just, that's the thing.
He wanted to make a movie about the war and specifically that battle, whereas Tom Hanks wanted to make a movie about the soldiers in the war, which is a different movie entirely.
And it is. And the characters in this movie are amazing. And what we get to experience with this squad is great. And it has such an interesting cast, because obviously it's like, who's the biggest leading man that you could possibly get at the center of this, who's like going to carry this but have like this fatherly kind of vibe to him, is Tom Hanks.
Yeah, especially in the mid 90s, which I know this came out in 98, but it was filmed in like, you know, 96 through 97, released
Mhm.
in 98. Like there was no bigger movie star on the planet, at least from like an awards perspective. You could make an argument that Tom Cruise was still like the big, and you could make an argument still that Tom Cruise is the biggest movie star on the planet.
Yep.
But like in the mid, like there was Tom Cruise had just won back-to-back best acting Oscars just a
Yep.
few years earlier with Philadelphia and Forrest Gump. Like this man was the man to get.
And like, did he even get nominated?
Yes.
He did.
Yep, he was nominated for best. He was actually the only actor that got nominated from this movie.
Crazy.
No one else got a performance nomination, and it almost makes it sound like the performances in this movie aren't that good if only Hanks got a nomination. But really, everyone is such a perfect ensemble that and it should exist, if an ensemble category existed at the Academy, this would have easily, either that or the Thin Red Line, it'd probably be right up there from that year, or God, heaven forbid, Shakespeare in Love. But like the ensembles, the way these soldiers banter off one another or like rely on one another, confide in one another, is so gripping in so many different ways. But yeah, it's only Hanks that actually got a nomination for a performance in this.
Do you recall who won in 98?
I do not off the top of my head, but I can find that out.
And as we're talking about, because like you have Matt Damon, who I guess technically
fresh off Good Will Hunting.
Yep. You have Tom Sizemore, who's like the perfect tough guy.
He went on to pretty much do the exact same role a few years later in Black Hawk Down, and you know what? He was still great there too.
Yep. He had Heat.
Oh,
before the
Roberto Benigni for Life is Beautiful. Remember, he got up and he walked on top of the chairs. It was like he like stood on top of the crowd, and then he got up on the stage, and I forget who was presenting the award, but he kissed her, and it was really awkward. Yeah, it was Roberto Benigni won. Tom Hanks was nominated. Ian McKellen was also nominated for Gods and Monsters, Nick Nolte for Affliction, and Edward Norton for American History X.
Oh God,
that was a big year. So
how? Just put in the context here. How was it that the performance in a Holocaust movie was the least serious performance out of all those performances?
Yeah.
Well, that's because Life is Beautiful is like 50% of it's just a silly rom-com. And then it turns into a Holocaust movie halfway through. But anyway, damn, that's a hard pill to swallow because there's some intense performances on that list. But, you have, I'm not really familiar with Edward Burns, but interesting Barry Pepper popping up here as the sniper, who's such a great character in this.
Yeah, I love all the different I called them archetypes when I wrote my review for this. Mm-hmm. And Barry Pepper is the Christian militant, very much an archetype that is still very grounded in today. These people that fit this kind of personality mold are very well known to go into the military. These are people that are very devout in their faith, and they see it as almost a calling from God to be a part of the armed forces, whether because they're trying to live up to a family lineage or whatever have you. And I actually, of the non-main characters, the non-main Tom Hanks and a couple others, of the people that are just in the squad, I actually find the Barry Pepper character, the sniper, Private Jackson, to be my favorite character. I think he's the most interesting. I don't even necessarily agree with his point of view through most of the movie, but I find his character to be riveting and interesting.
And he gives such a great performance too.
Yes.
And it's so interesting because which is really funny because his second most memorable performance to me is as Lucky Ned Peppers in True Grit, which is really funny.
Yeah. He was also in the Green Mile for people that it's actually weird. I was looking at this back when I was doing my review again, is how many people actually had probably their career best performance in this movie.
A lot of people.
A lot of people have done great work outside of this film. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that their careers have been garbage except for this movie, but it is astounding how many people were in this movie that were better here than they ever were anywhere else, even if they were amazing somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it happens with many people in this squad.
Because, like, you have Adam Goldberg, who I know
Yes.
popped up in A Beautiful Mind.
Yes.
But, like, he's fantastic here. Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel had only done one other feature film before this. It was something that he had independently produced himself. This was his first not like big screen film. This was it. Like, and nowadays, you know, because family, you know, Vin Diesel's just like a running joke and a meme almost because of Fast and Furious and Triple X and Riddick and all this other stuff. But like, he was displaying real chops here. I would say that this was Vin Diesel's best performance ever. You know, he's one of those people. The two big ones,
Iron Giant, and I'm not joking about that.
The like, two seriously. Other big ones for me that that stick out in my head are Giovanni Rabisi and Jeremy Davies.
Yep.
I fell in love with these two because of this movie and their performance in this movie. And I've gone on to watch or try to watch as much of their stuff as I can. I don't think either of them has been as good as they were in this movie, but they've been great elsewhere still.
Yeah.
And especially Jeremy Davies. What he is doing here is Upham. I want to go on an Upham tangent real quick. Okay. So again, if you've seen this movie, you know this character, but if you have not seen this movie, after the D-Day scene that we described, Tom Hanks as the captain, the leader of his squad, his platoon, is actually, I think, taken away from him. And then he just gets like a small squad to work with. He's given this special mission. Hey, go find this Private Ryan, who is somewhere we don't know. He airdropped behind enemy lines on D-Day. He dropped off course. We don't know where he is. We don't even know if he's alive, but go see if you can find him and save him, because he had 3 other brothers enlist with him and all 3 of them are dead. And we at least want to get one person from this family home alive to this family, to this mother. That is the mission. It's very straightforward. And we see all of this through Tom Hanks's eyes, and Tom Hanks handpicks his squad that he wants to go on this mission. And they're all of people that, if you're paying attention, were in the D-Day scene. They were all there. They all get a moment. Some of them even more brief than others, but like, you know, Private Jackson is there and he has a scene where he has to snipe and perfectly hit this bunker. So it makes this bunker, like, they're all there. Except for Jeremy Davies, except for Corporal Upham. He is an interpreter. He is not really there for combat. He is there because he can speak German and he can speak French, and he's very good at it. And he is there just to help them navigate the French countryside and to talk to people. And he acts as our audience surrogate. We, the audience, are Corporal Upham. We are joining this squad of troops that have already formed bonds, relationships. They already know each other inherently. And when Jeremy Davies is asking, hey, where did you come from? Or what do you do? That's us, the audience, asking these other troops what they do and who they are so that we can learn about them. And it's interesting because as the movie progresses, something very intense starts to shift in the squad when they start to realize that this mission is FUBAR, as they say over and over. And we, as the audience, again, Jeremy Davies hears this word FUBAR and he doesn't even know. They just say it's a German word. And he's like, I speak German and I've never even heard this word.
Yeah.
And eventually you start to see that especially after one major event where someone dies, they all start to turn and they start to go very dark and bleak and like, no, this mission is not worth it. And we're not even going to follow the rules of war. We're starting to lose our sense of humanity and morality and self-worth. And we don't even care because now we're pissed and we're hurt and we're going to take out our wrath and vengeance on someone. And it's Upham, again, as the surrogate for the audience, who has to step in and be like, no, this is not right. Like, we have to be better than this, because if we are not better than this, then we might as well be them. We're no different than them. We are no better than the Nazis. We have to be the better person here, or else what are we fighting for? If we all lose our sense of humanity, it's all for naught. And something about that messaging and his performance of that messaging, it's especially weird if you watch this movie at a younger age. You can almost construe him as just being a coward, and a lot of cowardice. I don't want to get into combat, and there is some of that there. I'm not naive. Like, clearly he doesn't want to fight. He's an interpreter, for Christ's sakes. But at the same time, he's also not wrong. Like, if we take these steps, we are the worst version of ourselves, and we have to learn restraint, and we have to be able to not exact vengeance. And if that is construed as cowardice, then so be it. I would rather be a coward who has a soul and a sense of humanity than a murdering blood wraith who is just a horrible human being. And his performance of that character through that characterization as the surrogate for the audience is just so compelling. He is so damn good.
Yeah. Which, on a side note for Jeremy Davies, I just clicked on his profile on IMDb and my mind has been blown, because I recall seeing him in a film when I was in high school called Spanking the Monkey. I had no idea that was a David O. Russell film. My mind is just like, what? But most
recently, people would know him from The Black Phone, which came out this year. He was the alcoholic father. Yeah, that was Jeremy Davies.
I am probably one of the biggest Lost fans.
I loved him in Lost. He was great.
And I loved him as Faraday in that. And I feel like that is the closest thing that he's had to, like, real meaty performance.
I think that's the best he's ever done besides this movie. I would agree.
Yeah. And which there's one scene that you were alluding to, which I think is one of the best scenes in the whole film, because we see another amazing performance from one of the actors in a very tragic scene, but then things go sideways.
Yes.
And you see Tom Sizemore at his worst. Which
Edward Burns at his worst.
Yep. And there's just a mounting tension there. And I love the sense of detail in this film, because everything comes back. Like the little conversations going on, because at one point, there's a really tender moment between Tom Hanks and Jeremy Davies, and he like lets him in on this bet that's going on about what he really does for a living. And you're thinking, how the hell is Tom Hanks going to subdue this situation? And he's just like, what's the pull up to?
Yep.
And what follows with that is like, damn, this is why you get Tom Hanks in this movie.
Yeah.
And he just kills it. And like, you as an audience member feel like your tension and everything has been deflated, just like all the characters. And you're just like,
it makes you realize that we're all just humans. He's a English teacher. He's a baseball coach. Like, what are we doing here? And it all puts it into perspective of like, none of us are equipped for this. None of us are physically, emotionally equipped for this. This is all going to destroy us and, wreck our souls for years or decades to come. Like,
this is World War II. This was not a professional soldier war.
No.
Everybody, every able man got sent off to war. It's like, and Vietnam was not a professional soldier war. Yep. There is a level of just like, these are just people trying to do. And like he said, if this mission, saving this Private Ryan, means that I can get home to my wife, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And that connects so well, because there's a scene, like a quick exchange, I feel like earlier in the film with him and Tom Sizemore, like, Ryan better like cure
cancer or something,
disease or something,
or invent a better iridescent light bulb.
Yeah, and that little thing that seems such like an off comment becomes one of the most emotionally impactful lines in the history of cinema. I'm just throwing it out there.
So I don't want to go too much into themes. I want to save that for like my last piece, but I am going to put a pin in that exact line, because I will make an argument, because again, going back into why some people don't like this film, it can be construed as very pro-war and pro-American superiority. And I understand that interpretation, but I'm going to rebuttal against it. And it's specifically because of that scene as my main point of evidence. So viewers, listeners, keep your pin in that one. We're definitely coming back.
And if people have that perspective that this is like pro-war, pro-America war, it's like, I don't get that. No. Did you watch the same movie as me? But anyway, just throwing out, and here's some of the cameos. Like,
yeah, the cameos in this movie are nuts. Like, go for it.
Ted Danson's in this movie.
Yes.
Paul Giamatti's in this movie. Dennis Farina's in this movie. Bryan Cranston has like a tiny role at the beginning of the film as someone who's missing an arm in an office. And I'm trying to remember, and this is hilarious, I'm trying to remember what the actor's name is because he was in Fargo. He's the main one that has like the big speech at the beginning of the movie on why they should find Private Ryan. And I also just watched Mr. Deeds this morning, and I'm just like, is that too?
Harv Presnell, I think that is, or I'm pretty sure it's him.
I think that sounds about right. I'm also flipping through, like, Andrew Scott was in this.
Yeah. Leland Orser is in this as the guy who was piloting the plane that had the extra metal welded to the bottom, and he crashed the plane. And then in one of his earliest roles ever, Nathan Fillion is in this.
Minnesota Ryan.
Yeah, they find a Private Ryan, and it's not the right Private Ryan. It is. The Ryan they're looking for is James Francis Ryan from Iowa, and they find a guy named James Frederick Ryan from Minnesota, and it's played by Nathan Fillion. He's there, and they blink and you miss it, maybe 45-second cameo, and it's crazy. And he's great in there.
Ryan Hurst from Remember the Titans and We Are Soldiers.
He was the one that had the
yelling one.
The German grenade, and this German grenade went off right. You got to speak up louder, sir.
Yes, Harv Presnell is exactly who I was talking about, who, just pops up into smaller things and just like and I'm trying to find him, but like he was one of the soldiers. Is it Dylan Bruno? That doesn't sound right. Oh, it is Dylan Bruno. He was in the show Numbers, and he's one of the soldiers who's with Ryan at the end, and like you've seen him before. He's been cops, he's been soldiers in a lot of
this
things.
Movie is the definition of one of those movies of you might not know their name, but you'll see them and be like, oh, I know that guy. What's he from? Like, that's gonna happen constantly. Like the best way I could equivalent it is if you saw the film 1917 about World War One by Sam Mendes that came out a few years ago, which is also an amazing film. Just a technical masterpiece, and I think it's a brilliant piece of art. But it's really just following two guys and eventually just one guy as he goes on a carrier mission. But every once in a while, he makes kind of like video game checkpoint stops where he like falls in line and meets like really famous English actors that are there for like brief cameos, and then they're gone. It reminds you a lot like that. It's just like, all right, we're going to have these cameos where every so often throughout the movie, they're going to meet up with another squad or another captain or something, and they're going to get a little bit more information in their search to find Ryan, and that whoever that they're going to meet up with is going to be Paul Giamatti. It's going to be Ted Danson. Like, what is going on?
And then you have that quick realization that Benedict Cumberbatch's whole performance is in the trailer.
Yeah.
Because that's how little he's in the movie. But anyway,
another big performance I did want to speak on. I touched on it earlier, so I went on a massive Jeremy Davies tangent, but I said there was one other great one, and that's Giovanni Rabisi.
Yeah.
Giovanni Rabisi plays Irwin Wade. He's the medic of the group. And I've always loved him as well, just like Davies, since I saw this film. I think what he's doing is actually some of the best acting of the group. He is so passionate in his performance. Like, he's so very genuinely wants to help these people. He wants to save lives. Like, he's one of the few people I think that quote unquote gets it early on, which is like, this is awful. I want to try to save as many people as I can while I'm here. Yeah. And like when you spoke about on D-Day, when a medic saves the guy's life, and then that person then immediately gets shot anyway at a different part of his body and it kills him. He was the medic that just, he doesn't even like react negatively in the sense of like, oh no, and starts crying or like tries to hide from bullet. No, he almost like stands upright, like kneeling in front and starts cursing out the Nazis, like, give us a chance, you bastards. Like he's not scared of no one, no fear in his heart or in his eyes whatsoever. But at the same time, he gives one of the most powerful moments of this film when at one point they're taking sanctuary from a storm in an abandoned chapel, in an abandoned church. And he tells this story that like wrecks me to my core about his mother when he was back home before the war and growing up as a kid, about how his mom was his best friend and he loved nothing more than when he could spend time with his mom, but his mom worked a night shift and couldn't always make it home by the time he was getting ready to go to bed. And sometimes he would just try as hard as he could to stay up late so that he could be there when his mom got home. And the more he tried to stay up, the quicker he fell asleep. And it was actually his remedy for falling asleep so well is trying to stay awake. But then he goes into this really somber message about what it means to exchange time with a loved one versus taking a certain type of action in your life or making a certain decision. And man, it guts you and you just feel for this guy. And I was just like, what Giovanni Rabisi is doing in this scene is better than what Academy Award winning performers have done in other supporting roles. And I feel like he gets no recognition for it. And that is like slanderous in my book. He is impeccable to his core in this movie, even down to the end of the line for his character arc. The last time we see him, it is gut wrenching.
Yeah,
absolutely gut wrenching.
And another special thing, thinking about that scene, because we talked about that sequence a lot, is how we see most of it.
Yeah.
Through Upham with that little...
Again, he's our surrogate. We're seeing it from his point of view.
It was amazing. And like just the way he was experiencing that danger, that violence, and like looking at the grenade chucking.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm pretty sure at one point one of the German soldiers catches a grenade and then chucks it right back.
Yep.
And it's just like, oh my God. That's the thing, because like this film pulls no punches.
Oh yeah.
It shows the fragility of life. It shows the awkwardness of just chance. Like from like a tiny thing where like Paul Giamatti is such a very specific character in this movie, and
he's a little bit of the bumbling oaf, but like respectable at the same time. It's weird, but yeah, there's a moment of random chance where he just happens to sit in a certain location, and it creates one of the biggest tension-filled moments in the entire film. Like out of nowhere, you don't, and it's intentional. You're not supposed to see it coming. That's literally the point, is that war is hell and danger is literally everywhere, right around the corner, and you could not even know it's coming. Mm-hmm. And that scene, every time I see that scene, I'm just like, I don't know what I would do. Like I'd probably just die. I'd probably just dead. That's what happens to me.
Well,
like, or I just immediately start pulling a trigger and then everyone dies. And it's just hell.
Well, and what happens with those Germans, and just, it's hard to get out of it. It's just like, because I hadn't seen, to give a little bit of background, I hadn't seen this film until college. No. And a bunch of my friends were so like, how have you not seen Saving Private Ryan, that they bought me it?
Yeah.
And they're like, watch this movie. But like, they're like, one of the things that just sticks in my head is how that one German soldier just doesn't fall down. Like he just like falls back and sits on that table, just sitting up, just limp. And you're just like,
and then Tom Sizemore comes and pushes him over, and you just see this like arcing waterfall of blood, like coming from his mouth. And you're just like, oh
yeah. And, you know, even up until like, there's so many of those just moments in that final sequence that just stick in your head.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't let it go. like somebody holding on to a sticky bomb a couple of seconds too long and just like
gone. Like no trace that person ever existed. You couldn't identify him by his dental records because there's just nothing there.
Nothing there. And the moment where they seem to be turning the tide on the tank and then nobody is safe. And that like heavy artillery gun just takes out everybody.
Yep.
And one of the most dread-inducing shots in the whole entire film is a POV shot through a sniper scope of just slowly tank cannon. You're just like,
it's over. Game over. Gone.
Yep.
And you're just like, I loved that guy. And he's just
gone.
Yeah, gone. Doesn't matter. And if I had to say something from a soldier's point of view, he's, I would say, clearly the most, skilled in the terms of art, the art of war, the most talented person they have, probably the most valuable asset in that team, and just like gone in an instant. And what's crazy is because everything is happening so fast in that battle, like the next shot we see is Tom Hanks looking up at that bell tower as it explodes. And he doesn't even have time to mourn. He just sees it. He recognizes it. You can see the pain on his face, but then you can also see him like 2 seconds later being like, all right, I have to move. Like, I'm going to die. Like, we have to keep going. This is not over. And that's just how intense this film is. Like, it is relentless. I wanted to get a little bit into Steven Spielberg himself and Kaminsky, as you alluded to earlier. For whatever reason, I mean, not for whatever reason, we know the reason. Steven Spielberg has had a massive fascination with World War II. The reason that he has, that I was alluding to, is he has gone on record as saying, and it's really hard to disagree with him, that World War II is the most important event that's ever happened in the history of humanity in the last 100 years. In the last century, there's been nothing more pivotal than World War II and the Holocaust, like that whole encompassing time. Even prior to this film, he had already made 5 movies that either directly or indirectly were about World War II. Yep. Starting with the film 1941, which is, I think, his worst film. It's a really bad comedy about World War II, which
very ill-advised.
It's very ill-advised, and it's not well acted. The jokes are bad. Like, it's just bad. But still, that's where he started, with a film called 1941 about the Japanese coming to a comedy about the Japanese coming to bomb Los Angeles. Very weird. But then he did not 1, but 2 Indiana Jones movies that dealt with the Nazis and the occult and Hitler's fascination with the occult and trying to find these ancient relics and artifacts, which was a very real thing that Hitler wanted to do.
Yep.
So that's interesting. It's, again, we don't really think of them as World War II movies. Like, yeah, the Nazis are in there. They're the bad guys, but you think of them as like adventure movies, and it's Indiana Jones, and we're going through catacombs and tombs and stuff. But like, that's still a World War II movie.
Yeah.
Then he did Empire of the Sun, which was about Japanese internment camps in China during the Pacific Theater, well before Pearl Harbor.
Yep.
And then famously, just 4 years prior to this, he won his Oscar for Best Director. He won Best Picture for Schindler's List, which is probably the greatest film about the Holocaust. It's weird saying greatest, like it's a good thing, because the Holocaust is such a tragedy. But in terms of film as an art form, it is the greatest film about the Holocaust ever made, and it probably forever always will be. And now here he makes this. So he'd already made 5 movies about World War II before coming to this. And you could just see, like, his passion is right there. He wears it on his sleeve. One thing that I really like that he did is, a few years after this, The Bourne Identity is going to come out. And I think it was Michael Greengrass who directed that. And he's going to get credit for what we considered shaky cam action, which took over filming for a good decade. Like that, and even to this day, you still see aspects of it, especially in the way film fight sequences are edited. You see it all the time in Marvel movies. But the idea of like putting the camera in the action and making it feel more visceral by moving the camera around and shaking the camera as if you are part of the fight. That is essentially the aesthetic that we were going for. Mm-hmm. And Bourne Identity and Greengrass get the credit for that. but it's this movie that I really think that started it. It's Spielberg, especially in that D-Day scene, throughout the movie, really, but that D-Day scene is most prevalent. We are in that fight. That camera is shaking and moving around, but he does it better than Greengrass, which is why I think Greengrass gets the quote unquote credit, because Greengrass is almost indiscernible what's going on sometimes in the Bourne Identity. Like, it's happening so fast that you can't even keep track of Jason Bourne's movements. That was kind of the idea behind it. Whereas this one, Spielberg miraculously keeps it all in frame. It is crazy that he's able to shake this camera around and make it us feel like we're bounding up the sand while still keeping like 95% of all shots in frame. So you still see what's going on. It's crazy the amount of skill that would go behind that. And also, again, a lot of these performances are tremendous, but I always go back to a director is responsible for yielding those performances out of his cast. And the fact that he's able to get so much joy and anger and resentment and grief and remorse from these performances from these actors is all from him. I also want to, again, go into Jan Kaminski, as you mentioned earlier. He's the cinematographer here. I think what he's doing here is terrific. He won an Oscar for the cinematography here. This is a back-to-back Oscar for his efforts, not in like terms of years, but I don't think he did a film, or if he did, I missed it, between Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan.
Lost World, Jurassic Park. Because here's the thing.
Oh,
he's
that's right.
Literally every single Spielberg film since Schindler's List.
But what he's doing here is really, if you've done a little bit of digging onto this, so what he did is he actually bleached out the negative of the film, and that's what gives the film this kind of, I wouldn't call it like a pure sepia tone because it's not like fully brown, but it's a very muted color palette throughout the vast majority of the films, except for at the very beginning when we're in the modern day at the graveyard at Normandy, and at the very end of the film, that's in full color, but the rest of the film is not. And even then, when we're at that graveyard, when we see a shot of the American flag, that's also in the muted, bleached out, negative quality. It reminds me a lot of Barry Lyndon, which also won cinematography Oscar in 1975, and is actually considered one of the most beautifully shot movies ever made. But it was so good. Barry Lyndon was so well received for its cinematography because of all the natural lighting used for it. So much of the film is just out in the daylight and just perfectly knowing when to shoot, when the cloud cover was right, how to use natural lighting or even like candles. And Kaminski essentially replicates that here. So much of the footage is under natural circumstances, natural daylight circumstances. And when it's not, it's a lot of candlelight, surprisingly. Even that chapel scene I was describing, that's lit just with candles and like a propane lamp, I think, from their military supplies. Like, it all feels very natural and grounded, which just gives this granular sense of texture to the film. Like, you could almost reach out through the screen and like feel the grass, touch the dirt, feel the brick, like it's just technically very impressive, this whole movie.
This is like the most black and white color film, because like it feels like it's not really in color, but it is, because it's all gray tones, it's all browns, it's
grays,
all like
browns, blacks, dark blues.
It's very specifically
a lot of tan,
and it's very interesting because Kaminski made such engrossing, real, tangible worlds in Schindler's List and this, and then is able to make such artificial and strange things come to life and say like AI. That is the next film that comes after this in Spielberg's filmography. And he has one of his biggest trademarks is this striking lighting that he does in a lot of the films, especially after this one, with like AI, Minority Report, War of the Worlds, and stuff like that. But like this
he even does it to a little bit of degree here. Like, there are moments of lens flare that you could see, like, oh, this is where he was like gearing up for Minority Report and stuff like that. But like, there are moments where just like maybe there's an explosion or something real. It's not overbearing. but it just happens a couple times, and you're just like, it adds to the flavor of the film.
It's our last shot on Upham.
Yes.
There's this strange like lighting on him.
Yeah.
That
we glow to him. He is literally glowing white. And there's a purpose behind that. Again, I'll get to the themes, but yeah, it's great. Even through some of the other technical aspects of this film, this movie does a ton of practical effects, which I absolutely love. I think more pictures should be made with practical effects. I think one of the greatest modern examples of that is Mad Max Fury Road. It's just incredible what you can do with practical effects. It like 99.9% of the time will always look better than CGI effects. One thing I will say that when this movie does do CGI effects, they're usually as a supplement to practical effects. So you don't even notice them that much. It's not overbearing. Like this movie still looks really good. Like at no point are you going to look at that and be like, oh, that looks fake. That looks cheesy, or that doesn't look real. Like that literally never happens. Everything here feels incredibly real. That goes back to some of the other technicals. Like I mentioned earlier, the costumes are great. Even the art direction is great. Some of the set designs, you would think like, what do you mean set designs? It's just destroyed cities. Yeah, well, those destroyed cities still have to be planed out, and they have to be laid out because we're going to have to film it. And we're going to have to know the angles, and we're going to have to know lighting, and we're going to have to know how sound reverbs and all these things. And it's really well composed. Speaking of composition, the original score here by John Williams is tremendous. It literally makes me cry. I hearing some of these French horns and especially some of these trumpet medleys, like will bring a tear to my eye in a heartbeat. It is incredibly moving stuff. He's just absolutely killing it. It's one of his more understated scores. It doesn't have the big bombastic theme. It's not as quickly recognizable as Star Wars or Jaws or Superman or whatever, Harry Potter, and that's fine. Those are all brilliant scores too. But in terms of like fitting a film and not worrying about being quote unquote like iconic, this score is just jaw dropping. Like it's that good. Like a solid argument could be made that the best score is the score that you almost don't notice because it just fits and flows so perfectly with the film. And that's this score, like 90% of the film. You don't even know it's there, but if it wasn't there, you would notice because it hits you at the right moments and swells at the right times for these huge emotional beats or huge action sequences, and it is palpable.
I feel like the biggest scene that we really haven't touched on is in the climax of the film and centers on Upham.
Centers on Upham? Yeah.
Yep. And was it Mellish as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With the knife.
Yep. That sequence is so unnerving because you're right there. Like Kaminsky and Spielberg put you right there.
Yeah. And
that is brutal. It doesn't pull any punches. You're watching the whole entire sequence and just Upham's reaction.
Yeah. So I'm going to give another trigger warning. I trigger warned about the brutality earlier. I also know that there's a lot of people that they can do like guns in movies because like a bullet is just like it hits you. And for the most part, you're dead instantly. Or like sometimes you'll bleed out, but some people have a thing with blades. And this movie has a sequence is what you're dancing around here with a knife. It is for me the most uncomfortable death scene in the whole movie. Like, and I don't even think it's close because, like you said, there's nothing hidden here. Literally, Spielberg sets up the camera about 6 inches from the blade and angles it such that you can see the blade as it's going into his chest, while you also can see the pain, anguish, fear, and life draining from the face of the victim. It is awful to watch. So if that is not your jam, and again, completely understandable if that's not something you want to see, then you might not want to watch this movie. Or if you get to that scene and you'll know what's coming, fast forward a minute, because it is really difficult to watch.
And just that scene just leaves you in a place in this film that just so uncomfortable. And you've talked a lot about Upham is like our conduit into this film.
He's us, yeah.
And we feel as helpless as Upham,
yeah,
in that scene, from stopping all of this,
because we can't do anything to change anything.
And then
that's the point. That's intentional.
And it almost comes back to bite him until he finally has to do what he has to do. And that shot might be one of my favorite shots in the film, because like it just holds right on Upham that whole entire time, and you're just like, and he finally got pushed over the edge to do that, and felt like he had to do that. And in that moment, like, that's us finally just completely being consumed by this movie.
Yeah, and it's us also breaking as Upham is breaking. It's us realizing that even with the best intentions, war will still turn us into monsters, because that's inherently what war does. It is unavoidable, because there will be scenarios or situations where you have to do the worst thing, and it just sucks, and it just strips you of your humanity. And again, that's why we don't see the victim in that scene that you're referring to. That's why the camera stays on Upham. And if you watch his eyes, like, he hates himself in that moment. He hates himself, just as we do. We're like, you're sitting there like, yeah, that's probably the right decision at that point. And then you sit there and think back like, wait, I just agreed to that. What does that say about me? And now we are breaking. The whole movie, we are Upham. I can't stress that enough to anyone that has not seen this movie, or if you have seen this movie and you didn't see that, I would recommend going back and watching it again with that in mind, that we are Upham. And the journey he is going through is the journey we, as the viewer, as the American people back home in the 40s that couldn't go off and fight the war, as the viewer now in the current era, we are Upham. I think this is as good as time as any to really transition into the thematics of this film.
Yep.
So I want to touch on a couple things here. The first is going to be just overall themes, and then we'll get into whether this is a patriotic film and pro-war or anti-war and all that. Firstly, so this movie is all about the value of action versus the value of life, and the exchanges that we make in life that correspond with those values. There is not a single point in this movie where an exchange is not being made. And the movie dares us to ask, is the exchange worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? The most glaring and obvious one is clearly the main storyline of the movie itself. Is it worth it to send a squad of 8 men to go rescue one man? Is that worth it? Is it worth putting the lives of all these people, one of which is a captain who is incredibly knowledgeable about war and how to lead a platoon of troops? Is it worth potentially sacrificing that to save one man? Well, that depends on who you ask. Are we asking those 8 men? They're going to say no. They say no throughout the movie many times. Almost all of them say no. Even if we get to that one man, is he going to agree to it? The movie even tackles that. Like, what does he have to say about that? But then what if we ask that man's mother? Would she say yes? Yeah, she probably would. Mm-hmm. But then also, what about the greater military cause itself? I go back to that's a captain who has all this experience. What does the military think? Well, some people in the higher ups were saying, no, that's not worth it. We're not going to send people behind the enemy lines. And then someone else whipped out a speech from frickin' Abraham Lincoln and said, this is worth it. And here's why, because we have morals. And that's just the main storyline. You have the position of, was it worth it to weld steel plates to the bottom of DeWint's plane to protect a general? 22 people died because of that, because of the extra weight, and he couldn't maintain the air speed and levels to keep the plane up? Or is it worth it to potentially move this family and these little kids from one damaged French village to another, because the other town over might not be in an active state of war, but now we're having to risk taking on the responsibility of these kids? What's it like to follow orders? You know, famously, the Nazis were like, oh, I was just following orders. How is that any different than when Americans are just following orders? What do these exchanges mean? What do we value? Even going back to that story I talked about with Giovanni Rabisi's character, the medic, saying, I made an exchange where I pretended to sleep even when I knew I was awake, and I could have spent more time with my mom, but I didn't. And he says to himself, why did I do that? I don't even know. And it's this really tough realization that we go through life all the time, weighing choices and decisions, actions versus potential outcomes, not knowing what the future is going to hold, not knowing what it's going to come forward, but knowing that there is no turning back. Time is finite. We don't have a time machine. This is it. You can only make one exchange, and sometimes it's not always going to be worth it. Even if you go into something ahead of time, it's like, oh, I could go the easy way or the hard way, or I can go the right way or the wrong way. And sometimes you might see a path that looks like the easy right way up front, but then you get into it and you're like, holy crap, the other way was actually, yeah, maybe even harder, but that was the right way. And like, this movie tackles that relentlessly and never lets go of the idea of what does it mean to exchange what we do for something else. What is the value of life? What is the value of an individual, of a person, of a soldier, of a father, of a mother, of a son, all of that. And it is so telling that a movie can do this while developing such rich characters, while being filmed so tightly, while giving us some of the biggest war footage and action sequences you could ever imagine. Like, there are a million other movies that try to do stuff like this and fail miserably. And the fact that this movie achieves all of its goals is astounding to me.
I feel like, and it's so interesting that this came out just how many years after Schindler's List?
4.
This is, I would argue the 90s were peak Spielberg.
Yes.
Because Schindler's List is the best drama that he ever made. And this is the best war film he ever made. And I would argue, for me personally, Jurassic Park might be the best science fiction film that he ever made. And this is, which that one's a tougher one because he's made plenty. And
I mean, you could make an argument about Jurassic Park that it's the best sci-fi, it's the best action adventure, and it's even the best horror film he's ever made.
And he's made a lot of great films. And just this, between 1993 and 1998, when this came out, Spielberg was doing something special. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many films after this can really be put into that category of his all-time greats. Mm-hmm. But realistically, taking a step back, I think this might, well, I had to think about that. I really love West Side Story. That was pretty amazing.
I love West Side Story. I think it's beautiful. But if you look at his run here, and I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm not gonna give you just the 90s. I'm gonna go back and do just over a decade. Mm-hmm. In 1985, he did The Color Purple. In 1987, he did Empire of the Sun. I'm skipping over a couple that are lesser knowns, but
always
big ones here. Empire of the Sun. In 89, he did Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. In 91, he did Hook, which, depending on who you ask and how old they are, that's either a masterpiece or it's not. But in 93, he then did Jurassic Park, then Schindler's List, Lost World Jurassic Park, then Amistad, and then Saving Private Ryan. Like, that's a run right there. Mm. Like, even with some of the weaker things, maybe you don't like Hook, or Lost World is certainly not as good as the original Jurassic Park. There are some literal all-time films in this list right there in that like 12-year span. that films that we still consider some of the best films ever made, period, by anyone in the history of film.
And I would argue that this is his last top tier Spielberg until 2021. And
Yes.
that's something that's crazy to think about. This
I have a personal affinity for Catch Me If You Can. I think that is one of his best films ever made. But I would agree that from an artistic level, as much as I love Catch Me As You Can, that's more of an entertainment film to me. Mm-hmm. Like from an artistic level, he never achieved Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List status again until West Side Story. I think that is easily one of the best films he's ever made. That is cinema. Holy crap.
Well, and it's so interesting because if you look at so many of the films that he came out in the 2000s, they would be top tier films for so many
for
directors.
Anyone else. If you put Munich or Lincoln under anyone else's like stable of films, catalog of films, one of the best films they ever made. But like for Steven Spielberg, and you mentioned Lincoln, you're like, does that make top 10? I don't know. This is debatable. I personally, for me, no, it doesn't. I don't think it's top 10 Spielberg. And that's crazy. Yeah. That is crazy that something like Lincoln is like, nah.
I think it puts in so much great perspective because having done Scorsese prior to Spielberg and doing Spielberg now, I don't know if I really have a whole lot of other directors that have that longevity and quality.
No.
I think you would have to go elsewhere. So like an Akira Kurosawa.
Yeah.
Or like, I won't even argue like Hitchcock as well, but like there's times where like films weren't, well, Spielberg had times where his films weren't great either.
I mean, yeah, he made
there's very few people like
Scorsese, but
Scorsese's still like pumping out like classics at like 70 something, 80 years old. But like it's really interesting because like I've been savoring these past couple of months of just like I've been watching Gold, and like I still have some Gold to watch after this, but you know, you'll have people arguing like Nolan and Tarantino. I'm gonna be done them in 2.5 months, 3 months, because it's just like they have 10, 11 films. This is like
this guy's made, at least on Letterboxd, they listed as 43 directorial films. Now that might also include like shorts. I don't know. I didn't really check.
I have 37 films that I'm doing for this.
Yeah. So, it looks like some of these are shorts, or there's one that's in production that he hasn't made yet. So, but he's listed on Letterboxd as 43. Like it counts the Fablemans, which now, it comes out later this year. So, but I mean, he's been doing this for decades, and there's not many directors around right now that have been doing this since the 70s. So
it's incredible. Yeah. But I appreciated all your perspectives on this.
Well, I want to go into one more thing. Again, I'm sorry for all the people that are already like, Heath, shut up. I can't help myself. But I think it's critical that we talk about this, and that's whether or not this is a pro-war, anti-war film.
My easy reaction is like, nothing about this film tells me that this is like an uber patriotic.
So I want to stress what I said earlier, that art is subjective.
Mm-hmm.
And if you feel that this is, pro-military industrial complex war propaganda, that's fine. More power to you. If that's the way you interpreted it, it's fine. And I could even understand to a degree some of that, where there is an air of American exceptionalism to this movie. The movie opens with an American flag and closes with an American flag. That's not an accident. Those are literally the first and final scenes of the film. But I would make the hard argument that the American flag you see at the beginning of this movie is not the same feeling as you get with the American flag you see at the end of this movie. So my belief is that this is very much a pro-soldier film, but a very, very anti-war film. And there's a big big distinction there. And it's an important distinction that we're still dealing with in our current political climate right now, where if someone says they're anti-war and people will be like, oh, you don't support the troops. And it's like, no, I have no problem supporting the troops. I love the troops. I have full support of the troops. I hate the war. They shouldn't be out there in the first place. Then there's a marked difference. The reason why I wanted to put a pin in that topic earlier. So about midway through the film, a character dies and it rattles the squad to their core. It's not even the first character in their squad that's died, for the record. But for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, I know the reason. The reason is they didn't have to die. There was a machine gun bunker that they could have walked around, and people even pointed this out. And instead, the decision was made that they were going to go assault this bunker and take it out so that this Nazi bunker couldn't potentially harm other people later on down the road. And because of that decision, again, like I was saying earlier in the themes, that's an exchange. That is, we could have walked around it and been fine. We chose not to, or one person in particular chose not to. And because of that, someone's life was lost. And it creates anger and resentment in a big way. And it leads to some really big character swings and really emotionally resonant moments. And in particular, we get one of the most candid moments that I think is actually a direct representation of how Spielberg feels. And it's the quote that I think represents the whole movie more than anything. And it's in that speech that you were referring to with Hanks, where he's like, with every man I kill, the farther away from home I feel. That is our hero of the film that is saying that quote. And he is saying that in a direct response to our surrogate, us, the audience, trying to let someone go, to release a prisoner of war, and so that it is not straight a war crime and murder. We, the audience, ask for no murder, for no war crimes, and our leader, our heroic leader, agrees and says that is the right course of action, because if we go down that path, we are no longer human beings. Steven Spielberg doesn't do anything by accident. This is intentional. It wouldn't be us, the audience, asking this question of our hero and our hero reciprocating and responding in agreement to us if that wasn't the message, if that wasn't the point. So much so that comes back throughout the rest of the film. We said that Corporal Upham has that big defining moment at the end. And that's because he is us breaking, as I described earlier, because he has now made the realization that possibly could have been made earlier of sometimes you have to make the hard decisions, but the war itself literally doesn't allow you to make the right decision, because the war itself will come back to bite you in the butt. And that is the nature of war. It is chaos. It is chance. It is uncontrollable. It is unrelenting. And it is horrible. And again, these are two very important moments in the film where Spielberg is saying, this is making us less human. And he's saying, we're forced to do it. We don't even have a choice in the matter. We are forced to be less human. That is the message. And I can't for the life of me imagine how, again, my interpretation, how this could be construed as anything but anti-war. If we are forced to be less human, then we can't be pro for that. There's just no reconciliation to that. Stephen very clearly shows these specific scenes and sequences, characters acting and responding to certain events and structures that brings us to this point of saying empathy is everything. We need to be better people. And yeah, there's still some American exceptionalism of, you can make the argument of like, we're going to support the troops while they're there. And if there ever was a war, quote unquote, worth fighting, it's clearly the one where we have to take out a tyrant who's committed to mass genocide and the destruction of an entire peoples. That's horrible. But this is still awful. Like, two wrongs don't make a right. Like this, yes, the Holocaust is awful and war is still awful. These are all awful things. And in two very specific movies, Spielberg has shown us that. He showed us that with Schindler's and now with Saving Private Ryan, that this was horrible, and it has gone on to define us as a human species ever since. So that's my interpretation. You could agree with it, you could disagree with it. Shane, I'd love your opinion, especially on those two scenes, if you see it the way I see it. But I think it's very clear that Steven and this movie are saying, yes, this happened, and yes, it's awful that it happened, and even almost necessary that it happened, which is, again, how I could see the pro war aspect of it and people seeing it that way. But Steven himself is showing through this audience surrogate and through our main heroic character that this is wrong and we shouldn't be doing this.
Well, and I definitely agree. Like, out of the times that I've watched this film, I've never once even thought that this could be a like pro-war, like, propaganda film.
Mm-hmm.
The whole entire central premise idea is propaganda, and then they spend the whole entire movie arguing why this is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And everybody does, even Ryan. When you get to the point, it's like, why should I get sent home? And that moment where Matt Damon really got me, it's like, I want to stay here with the only brothers that I have left. The group that he's with, protecting that bridge. And the whole entire film is like, this shouldn't be happening. And the weight of this film with earn this, and that weight brings Ryan to his knees, sobbing at the end of this film. And it's just like, no, this is not, there's nothing about this this is honorable. Here's the thing. There's great justification for doing what you have to do to end what Hitler was doing. But
doesn't mean it was honorable.
Doesn't mean that what happened was a good thing. What people did was a good thing. In general, as a whole, we stopped something very evil. But that
we lost a lot of ourselves in the process to stop that evil. Yeah.
And here's the thing. There's probably a lot of people. There's people out there that enjoyed doing these things.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of people that want to do these kinds of things. And that's scary. And, Jackson has a lot of that vibe of just like, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, like, I don't really agree with him as a character, but I find his character fascinating. But he is definitely, and again, he is there intentionally to represent that there are people that are all on board for this, that think this is not just like necessary, but like almost borderline fun. Like, they're enjoying it. And it's horrifying seeing that, but that there is a decent chunk of people that are like that. And the movie doesn't shy away from that fact either.
Yep. And like you said, we are Upham, and our hero is Hanks's character. And he tells us straight up why he's doing this. And it isn't because
he's not doing it to win. He's not doing it because he wants to stop Hitler. He's not doing it because he cares about his brothers in arms. Like, yeah, those are all like added benefits, but he states very clearly, directly, I'm doing this for one reason: to get home. I want to get home to my wife. And he even says, as a follow-up to that, because I'm scared that the longer I'm here, the more and more why my wife won't recognize me, because I'm becoming a different person. Like, that's how direct this movie is in stating its opinion. And again, Steven Spielberg's opinion of this is awful. Like, it is changing us to a worse version of ourselves. And you mentioned the earn this line. And I think that's the final piece of evidence I would use of, and again, Upham has been our surrogate, but in that moment, Tom Hanks is speaking to a character, but he's looking directly at the camera. He is talking to us. He is saying, earn this, do something better. We as a human species went through hell. There is mass genocide. There was murder in the millions, and we better do something to make it all worth it. Because if we don't, then what the fuck was the point of this? And it is, I mean, you could always say, what the fuck was the point of this? Like, it will always be tragic, but at least try to like salvage and rebuild and be better towards each other and treat each other well and like learn. And gosh, that's what makes our world so scary nowadays. It makes it feel like we're not learning some of these things that we should have learned. But this movie is very clearly saying like, this is wrong and we need to be better, because if we didn't, then what the fuck are we doing? We better earn the sacrifices that these people made.
Like, had humanity become so twisted that this is the one way to fix it?
Yeah.
And, sure didn't fix it, because look at the world we live in.
Yeah. I want to turn into a little more lighthearted, because that is more serious, and talk about the legacy of the film and one more final fun part of the movie that we didn't mention that I actually think. So you would think that this movie is entirely serious the way we're describing it. And for the most part, it is. It is a drama. It's a war drama. But there's actually humor to this as well. There's a couple times that the soldiers are cracking jokes at each other's expenses as they're just like walking across the French fields and whatnot. But there's one scene in particular towards the end, right before the final confrontation, where Matt Damon gives a story about his brothers back home. That is one of the funniest stories I think you'll ever hear. And it is worth noting that the reason why it's so funny, and Matt Damon is absolutely losing his shit and can barely hold himself together while he's telling the story, and Tom Hanks is genuinely laughing as well, is because it was improv. That was not in the script. Matt Damon just went and rattled that off the top of his head. So that story is really great. I love it. It's and again, literally right after that is when all hell breaks loose and the final fight starts.
Sometimes I forget how quickly that coin just flips.
Oh, I mean, it's instantaneous. Like, he finishes that story and then they start to hear like tanks. Like, it's immediate.
Yep.
I wanted to talk about the legacy of this film, because that's another big element of it. We're going to talk about the Oscars, and we're going to get into that. But one thing I wanted to get into is, again, I want people to understand how big this movie is. It came out almost 25 years ago. So there's probably a percentage of the viewers that are going to watch this that weren't even alive at the time. So you maybe don't know. And again, nowadays, R-rated films are a little bit different with the advent of things like Deadpool. Like, things are making more money, but for a long time, like, R-rated movies did not make a lot of money. Like, they were the adult films. People went and saw them because they were more serious subject matters, dramas, your awards caliber films, but they never were like the blockbusters. This film came out in the middle of the summer blockbuster season of 1998, and it made $216 million domestically. It made $268 million internationally, for $485.2 million in total worldwide. That is insane for a 3-hour-long war drama. That is crazy numbers. To put that in perspective, adjusted for inflation today, that's $882 million, just a bit short of $900 million. A rated R 3-hour-long war drama that was an awards film. That literally wouldn't happen today. Like, could you imagine Moonlight making $900 million? Like, no. Like,
it's like the closest thing was, and Dunkirk was PG-13.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Even and it didn't even make close to that.
It made 500 worldwide.
Yeah.
And that was a humongous success.
Yeah. So imagine almost an additional 400 million more than Dunkirk made, and it was rated R instead of PG-13. That's how big this movie was. It was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, including nominations for Best Picture, Best Actor for Tom Hanks, Original Screenplay, Original Dramatic Score for John Williams, Art Direction, and Makeup. It won 5 of them, including Best Director for Steven Spielberg, Sound Effects Editing, because back then they were 2 separate categories. And Kaminsky won for cinematography, and it also won for film editing. Again, going back to like how amazing the camera footage was and splicing those battle sequences together. There's actually even I didn't even mention this. There's a sneaky couple of oneers that Steven does, like in the D-Day scene and a couple other action scenes that like, they just go on for like 2 minutes and you don't even realize that there hasn't been a single cut and you've just been following them. And you're like, what the heck? It's so good. This film was selected for preservation into the film registry at the Library of Congress back in 2014. Many people have listed this as the best war movie ever made. That's not even just my opinion. That's like critics, pundits. The AFI, the American Film Institute, listed this as the 71st greatest film of all time when they came out with their official list. So this is, to say this is a big movie is an understatement. Like this, it doesn't get much bigger than this. And because of that, we also have to talk about awards, even beyond the nominations and wins I just listed. So 3 times in the history of film, a film has won the Producers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Golden Globes, and the Oscar for Best Director, and not won Best Picture. This was the first time it had ever happened. Since then, it's happened 2 more times with Brokeback Mountain, which lost to Crash, and La La Land, which lost to Moonlight. Now, I actually like Moonlight, so that's fine. The Brokeback Mountain one is ridiculous. And this is the most ridiculous one. In fact, to this day, depending on who you talk to, but a lot of critics and pundits will consider this probably the greatest snub in the history of the Oscars, in the history of the Academy, that Shakespeare in Love beat Saving Private Ryan. Now, I want to preface before I go on my little tangent that I actually like Shakespeare in Love. I think it's a good movie. I have no problem with it, but it's not Saving Private Ryan. And that's its really only flaw, is it's just not this movie. There's one movie that is a great romantic comedy set in Victorian England about William Shakespeare as he's writing Romeo and Juliet. And there's the other film, which is the greatest war epic ever put to film. Excuse me. And it's a shame for Shakespeare in Love, honestly, that it will have to harbor this legacy for the rest of for all time. People will always say, yeah, you didn't deserve it. You were tainted. You didn't deserve to win. And what really sucks is, and you alluded to this earlier, as Shakespeare in Love was a Weinstein Company production. That was Harvey Weinstein. That was right when he was in charge of like Miramax and everything. And he was really changing the game on how the Oscars were campaigned for. Like before Weinstein, again, I'm not even going to get into all of his off-screen we'll just say this very clearly. He's a disgustingly horrible human being and he deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life. And we'll leave it at that. But what he did for the Oscars fundamentally changed the way people campaigned for films. Before the Weinstein Company, it was different. And after him, it was markedly changed, that the way people would go to late night shows, the way people would deliver screeners, the way people would exchange money. And it came as a shock to most people that Shakespeare in Love won at the time. It was considered a snub instantly, even that night. And even to this day, I know that they had a poll of Academy members, I think back in 2014, and almost unanimously they said if they could do it a second time, if they could do it over, yeah, Shakespeare in Love would lose to Saving Private Ryan. So again, it's no slam on Shakespeare in Love. It is a good movie. But Harvey Weinstein's campaigning practices completely fundamentally changed how votes were tallied and how people voted in the first place. And Saving Private Ryan lost a award that should have, in my eyes and virtually everyone's eyes, should have gone to them.
And people say the same thing about The Social Network. Surprise, surprise. King's Speech. Weinstein. And
if you were a fan of Gangs of New York and Martin Scorsese, and it lost to Chicago, that was Weinstein. It happened many, many times from the mid 90s through the 2010s that Weinstein movies won Best Picture because they weren't the best movie, but they were campaigned for the best. It happened a lot, actually.
Hours.
So I wanted to bring that up. It's an important part of film history at this point. Yeah. It's something that is worth talking about and mentioning because unfortunately some people will be like, Saving Private Ryan can't be that good. It didn't win Best Picture. Like, it should have won Best Picture. Pretty much everyone expected it to win Best Picture. And even if it didn't win, which again, it didn't, regardless of the circumstances of the didn't win, whether it was more legit or not, Saving Private Ryan is still a masterpiece of filmmaking. And I think easily the best film of that year. The only other valid argument I ever heard someone make for why it lost was because it split the vote with another World War II film that was The Thin Red Line, that was also nominated for Best Picture that year. It's worth mentioning. That was a very anti-war film, much more prominently than Saving Private Ryan. I'll give it credit for that. And that was also a Terrence Malick film, and it was his return to film. What, it had been like 20, 30 years, something like that, since he had last made a movie. So yes, I could see that split the vote. If, there's, people wanted a World War II epic, there were two World War II epics. But then my counterpoint to that would even be, there were two Victorian era English films nominated for Best Picture, because it wasn't even just Shakespeare in Love. Elizabeth was nominated for Best Picture as well. So, like, what are we talking about? Year. It was it was two Victorian era English films and two World War II films were 4 of the 5 nominated films for Best Picture.
Life is Beautiful the 5th one?
Yes.
That was even about...
Yeah, that's the Holocaust. So, I mean, it's just...
Something when it was in the air that night.
Yeah.
And you made a comment. I really hope there's nobody out there that decides what's a great film or not based off of one Best Picture.
Yeah.
Really hope that's... Because there are more great films out there that haven't won Best Picture than there are great films that have won Best Picture.
Agreed.
So, but I enjoyed milking the most out of this one because I feel like this is one of the last truly great Spielberg films that I'm going to get to do. And I have no idea where my tournament's going to go. But like, you don't get to talk about Saving Private Ryan quite like this every so often. But we're going to shift gears into our last segment, which is giving the people here some recommendations, obviously besides Saving Private Ryan. But Heath, what did you want to recommend to everybody?
So I'm also doing a monthly article series for sifpop.com where I do an examination of the Academy Awards and what could have or should have won a certain award, but I do a spin on it where I don't talk about categories that actually exist, like Best Picture and Saving Private Ryan should have beaten Shakespeare in Love. I take a look at categories that don't exist, whether because they used to exist and the Academy discontinued them, or because they proposed instituting that award, but then backed out because they got cold feet, or really just categories that should exist and don't. Things like Best Ensemble, Directorial Debut, stunt work and choreography, a lot of things that should be recognized by the Academy, but the Academy doesn't. And so right now I'm prepping for a series of for an article about the films of 1981 for the Oscars of 1982, and just got done rewatching An American Werewolf in London. Just wanted to say that this movie is so much fun. Yep. It's a great horror. It's a great comedy. Watching a werewolf gouge people and destroy them while in the middle of a porn theater and there's porn and moaning in the background is just hilarious. But I really wanted to pay tribute to this movie because this was the first movie ever in the history of the Academy to win an Oscar for Best Makeup. It was the inaugural year for that award, and this film won. And if you have not seen this movie, go watch it and you'll understand why real quick, because yep. One of our characters starts to have premonitions and visions of ghosts of people that were eaten and killed by a werewolf, and the makeup effects on these people is insane. It is the exact reason why practical effects are so good and should yep. never go out of style and exchange for CGI. And you will go ahead and watch this and be like, wow, this movie from 1981 looks better than like Marvel movies that come out today in 2022, because this makeup looks amazing. So I love this movie. It's really entertaining. It's really funny. It's got some cool action, and it's actually quite a breeze. It's only like 90 minutes, so you can fly by it real quick. But if you really just want to be impressed with some of the best makeup you could ever see in makeup prosthetics in film, An American Werewolf in London is terrific.
That time period between that, The Thing, and just like there's something really impressive about practical effects at that point. And I love An American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
Also, thanks Tom Cruise's Mummy for completely ripping off that gag.
Yeah.
With Jake Johnson's character. I'm just like, where have I seen this before? Just ripped right out of it. So I have gotten to watch a decent amount of films in the past week. So what I always like to do is give 3 quick recommendations in different categories. One is a film that I rewatched of my own, which was Good Time. I rewatched last weekend, which is the Safdie brothers feature film debut with Robert Pattinson in it. That movie is a fever dream and really showed what they had up their sleeve and, come following up with Uncut Gems. I can't resist. But Robert Pattinson really, I feel like that was one of the roles where he really was like, hey, I can act.
Yep.
And now we all know. So with all the stuff that he's done since. One film that I got off of my watch list was Moonstruck. And as an Italian American, appreciating this crazy, weird romantic comedy is something else. And you know what? Nick Cage is something else.
Nick Cage is great.
My hand. Nick Cage with a one hand is one of the most ridiculous things ever put to film. And between him and Cher, like, I just adored this movie. I'm just like, this movie is so, you're an Italian American film when movie starts rolling and in Napoli. I'm just like, oh my God, this starts with That's Amore. Kick in that Dino. The only thing that could have made it more Italian American is if it was a Frank Sinatra song. And then one new film that I watched, and this is 100% going to wind up on my buried treasure article for this week for Sif Pop, is McEnroe, the new documentary from Showtime.
Nice. I wanted to see that. I saw the movie Borg versus McEnroe with Shia LaBeouf that came out a few years ago, and that was actually a pretty good movie. If anyone likes tennis or like obscure sports films, go look up Borg versus McEnroe. But I wanted to see that documentary too.
Highly recommend. This is one of those documentaries that I appreciate where it's from the subject and they don't pull punches about their story, or like the filmmakers pull punches about their story. This is pretty raw. And even the ways that they edited him talking about his matches was so intense. And I'm like, oh my God, he's going to win this? I'm like, it was so engrossing. And you really get to get inside the head of John McEnroe. And it added so many dimensions to my perception of this man, because my earliest, which is so funny, I rewatched Mr. Deeds today. Him just like, oh, you're Johnny McEnroe. And him just going out in the town and getting in all kinds of trouble. He was also in anger management. Apparently he's friends with Adam Sandler. But that was my perception of him, as just this crazy yelly guy. And you learn so much about him and what was going on in his head at the time. And I know some things about tennis. I'm not going to say I'm a huge tennis fan, but I do keep up with it occasionally. In how many sports can you say that you were the number one player in your sport for 4 years in a row?
Right. Tennis is like that, where one person just dominates.
At least since, because I think when I first was aware of tennis, it was Sampras, Andre Agassi.
Agassi.
And now it's been Federer and Nadal for how long? And Djokovic at this point. I don't know if I can name anybody else, at least male tennis players besides the 3 of them at this point. But this highly recommend. It's on Showtime, which I guess is going to be part of Paramount Plus soon, according to they're just combining them, which fine by me. Start consolidating some of this crap,
please. I know people like to dig on Netflix, and that's fine. And obviously times have changed, but man, I miss the the era of, oh, all you needed was Netflix, and Netflix has everything. God, that was so convenient.
Yeah, Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu was basically like the beginning parts of this, and now just everything. Which also, fun fact, I finished my classes today, getting ready for Wednesday when classes start, and I make all my own homework problems. And I looked up a whole bunch of data for my students to look at the changing market share of streaming services. That Netflix market share dipping.
Oh yeah,
It's going to get to the point where they're going to
Disney's just going
Amazon.
up.
It's not even Disney. HBO Max has surpassed Disney Plus.
Well, until Discovery ruins it, but yeah.
Until third quarter of this year comes in and they're like, screw you. At this point, I think Netflix is going to drop so much that Prime is going to be the highest market share. And, you know,
now that Prime bought MGM, that's very possible. They have so much more material now.
I feel like it's kind of cheating, though, because, like, how many people have Amazon Prime and it's because of the streaming?
Oh, I am one of those people. I actually only have it for the streaming. I'm not a big online shopper, mainly because I'm just not a big shopper. I don't spend much money. Yeah, so I have Prime just for streaming purposes.
They got that
Lord of the Rings. I just get the faster shipping as an added bonus.
That is fair, because I started with the shipping and got the movies as a bonus. Now I'm pretty sure, like, I haven't shopped a whole lot in the past year or so, but like, which is odd because usually that's the opposite direction everybody did during the pandemic, which is obnoxiously shop from Amazon. But anyway, so McEnroe, go check it out. It's on Showtime or Paramount Plus, whenever the hell that merger's happening. But Heath, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm glad that I got to have you for this show.
Thanks for having me.
And then thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.